Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this webinar on the furlough scheme extra guidance which has been issued. A few housekeeping issues first of all. Everybody's been put on mute so we can cut out any background noise, and you'll be able to unmute yourself later on if you want to ask a question, and question and answers will come at the end. If I can't answer any of your questions, please just drop me an email and we will get back to you because the guidance is changing all the time. We have use of the chat box, so if you want to ask a question, you don't want to talk on the webinar, please feel free to make use of the chat box. There's a bubble on the right hand side of the screen, and if you just want to type your question in there, that would be great. And again, we're going to have questions at the end. The webinar is being recorded and will be available on our Harts YouTube channel later on today. If you want to go back and have a look and cover off some other information, please feel free to go to YouTube, and it's Harts Limited spelt in full, and you'll find a copy of today's webinar up on there, along with all the previous webinars as well, which we've been done over the last few months. So before we actually get started today, let's all make use of this chat box so we can all get talking to each other. What I'd like you to do in the next 10-15 seconds is in the chat box, just do a straw poll of what you have missed most during lockdown. So if you can just type into that chat box what you have missed most during the lockdown, and we'll go through some of the questions later on and go through some of the answers later on. So it'll be interesting to see what you feel you have missed most. I'll just give you a few seconds just to type in some answers into there, and we'll be able to go through those and have a bit of fun towards the end of the session. For those that are just joining us, please make use of that chat box. We're asking the question today, what have you missed most during lockdown? And we'll go through some of the questions and some of the answers, later on. Let's have a few more seconds and we can go through that. And I know the answers are now streaming through, which is great. I know what I'm missing, and that's probably a haircut, and I could do with one of those, but that'll have to wait. So if we all end up being long-haired hippies by the end of lockdown, then fine. Okay, whilst you're doing that, we just want to run through our usual disclaimer, which is basically the presentation is produced for general guidance only, and professional advice should always be sought before any transaction is undertaken. Individual circumstances can vary, and therefore no responsibility can be accepted by Harts Limited or any of their affiliates for any action taken or any decision made to refrain from action by attendees of this presentation. Okay, what we are going to cover today is the updated guidance on the furlough scheme, updated guidance on the self-employed scheme. This all came out on the 12th of June. And we want to look at, again, at HMRC, who are beginning to flex their muscles on this. And we have some information coming through. We have some more information through today. And then again, we want to slot in there before questions and answers what Harts can do to help you through. And then we'll have a look at some questions and answers. Okay, so the furlough scheme, updated guidance was issued on the 12th of June. And again, a lot more detail came out in that. But let's just recap quickly. So no changes to the furlough scheme up to the end of this month. That's the 30th of June 2020. From the 1st of July, you can bring back part-time and claim coronavirus job retention scheme for normal hours not worked. And we'll come in to have a look at what normal hours are and how you calculate that. The scheme closes to new entrants and employees on the 30th of June. So therefore, you would have had to have been furloughed by the 10th of June to be able to claim. And the new guidance came out on the 12th of June deliberately, so there was no opportunity for playing around with dates and numbers and so on. And then you have until the 31st of July to claim for the period to the 30th of June. So we have a month to claim up to the end of this month. Okay, coming on to the flexible furlough scheme, which is from the 1st of July. So employees can be furloughed for any length of time, even down to hours, subject to their agreement. So what that means is that you can have somebody working for maybe 8 hours a day or you actually bring them back for 4 hours, so they'll be working for 4 hours in the day, you can actually furlough them for the other 4 hours in the day if they do a standard 8-hour day. To be eligible for the grant, employers must have confirmed to their employee in writing that they have been furloughed. So you must make sure that you have an agreement which is consistent with employment, equality and discrimination laws. That always takes precedence. Keep a written record of the agreement for 5 years and keep records of how many hours your employees work and the number of hours they have furloughed, i.e. the number of hours they are not working. No new employers and employees are admitted to the scheme post 1st of July. So you need to make use of it or you lose it. And if you've delayed putting a claim, you need to do it now. The reason why people may have delayed putting in a claim is that for employers who have over 100 or more employees, they can submit their claim via a spreadsheet and it makes it a lot easier to do. A number of companies have held off putting in a claim because they might have had 60 or 70 employees and each one has to be done individually, and they were hoping that the government would reduce that down, that spreadsheet option down, but they haven't done. So you now need to get your claim in to be able to get your money back. From 1st of July, no claim can contain more employees than in any claim up to 30th of June. What that means is that if you've furloughed 5 people up to the 30th of June, in July you don't have the option of furloughing 6 or 7 people. You can only do it up to the maximum of 5. The main exception to this is employees returning from parental leave. They can be added on. So if you've got 5 people previously and you've got somebody returning from parental leave, you can add them onto the maximum. That takes it up to 6 and gives you the option of furloughing 6 people. So we mentioned already that from 1st of July, agreed flexible furlough agreements can last for any amount of time, and employees can enter into a flexible furlough agreement more than once. So effectively from 1st of July, you can furlough somebody for part-time for a week. They can then go off and work full-time for a week. They can then go back onto furlough, and that can be running throughout the flexible furlough scheme, which is basically furlough scheme version 2 from July to the end of October. Where a previously furloughed employee starts a new furlough period before the 1st of July, this furlough period must be for a minimum of 3 consecutive weeks. This is the case regardless of whether the 3-week consecutive week period ends before or after the 1st of July. So what we're saying here is that if you have an employee who has been previously furloughed, because it's not open to new entrants, you have to be able to make the claim. If someone started on, say, the 22nd of June, they would have to be on furlough for a period of 3 consecutive weeks, which ends on or after the 12th of July. After this, they can be flexibly furloughed for any period. Okay, so however, after 1st of July, employers cannot make claims that cross calendar months, so the employer will need to make a separate claim for the period up to 30th of June. And we'll come on to the claims in a minute. Although the flexible furlough agreements can last any amount of time, you should claim for a minimum of 7 calendar days. So you don't have to be off for 3 weeks under the new furlough scheme. It can be any period, but your claim is for 7 days. So from 1st of July, only employees that you have successfully claimed a previous grant for will be eligible for further grants under the scheme. So if you didn't furlough anyone, this comes back to the point where you didn't furlough anyone from the 10th of June, it's too late for them. And this means they must have been previously furloughed for at least 3 consecutive weeks at any time from 1st of March to the 30th of June. And you employers will have until 31st of July to make any claims for a claim period up to 30th of June, which we've mentioned, and we've mentioned the maximum as well. But again, parental leave is the main exception there. So, making a claim from the 1st of July. Claim periods starting on or after the 1st of July must start and end within the same calendar month and must last at least 7 days, unless you're claiming for the first few days or the last few days in a month. So you can only claim for a period of fewer than 7 days if the period you're claiming for includes either the first or last day of a calendar month and you've already claimed the period ending immediately before it. So effectively what they're saying here is all claim periods must be up to the end of the month. So you can't cross, so you make a claim for say August at the end of July, and that will be up to the end of July. You can't claim for any of August claim until the end of August. You can claim before, during and after you process your payroll. So you can usually make your claim up to 14 days before your claim period end date and not have to wait until the end of the claim period to make your next claim. The problem you might have with that is that if you've got people who are on flexible furlough and they are working part-time, you might have an issue in relation to the amount of hours that they work and knowing what they actually can claim for. And again, I'll mention this again in a minute. And then your payments are made within 6 working days, as previously. So we're saying here, with the flexible furlough scheme, when you're claiming for employees who are flexibly furloughed, you shouldn't claim until you're sure of the exact number of hours they will have worked during this claim period, because you're going to have uncertainty. As businesses are opening up, you're not sure how much time you want from your employees. And so if you make a claim before the payment date, before the end of the month, and you're making your claim in advance, for the last, say, 7 to 14 days, you're not going to be too sure how much work they're actually going to be doing. The problem with that is, obviously, if you want the money in before you make the payment to your employee, you're going to have to make an estimate of the number of hours that they worked. If you claim in advance and you work for more hours, then you've got an underpayment, or you've got an overpayment because you've overclaimed for your furlough payment, and it's likewise the other way around. The issue is, if you've overclaimed the grant, you make the adjustment on the next return. If you underpay for them, then you actually have to phone up HMRC and make the claim. So it's not an even way of doing things. So with flexible furloughing, employees can work and be furloughed in the same pay period and even on the same day. And you need to calculate the usual hours, actual hours, and furloughed hours. And this is where it gets a bit messy. So if you're contracted for a fixed number of hours, then it's based on your last pay period and before the 19th of March 20. For variable hours, it's based on the higher of either the average number of hours worked in the tax year 1920 or the corresponding calendar period in the tax year 1920. So you've got to go back, if you're looking at average hours, you've got to go back for the whole of the 1920 tax year, look at the average number of hours that they've normally worked for the pay period, and that gives you the basis to work out your flexible furlough claim. Or you can, and if it's the higher figure is the corresponding calendar period in the tax year 1920. So again, I think this is how they're getting around the 0 hours contract people. They're looking at the number of hours that they will have worked on an average for the 1920, or comparing it to a similar period for the previous year. The record keeping requirements, again, are quite strict. You've got to keep a copy of all the records for 6 years, and that includes the amount claimed and claim period for each employee, the claim reference number for your records, your calculation in case HMRC need more information about your claim, the usual hours worked, including any calculations that were required for employees you furloughed, and actual hours worked for employees you flexibly furloughed. From April 19, you're supposed to have, if anyone's on variable hours, your payslips should give the hours worked, because that has become a requirement. So you can see that the record keeping is actually quite onerous. You've got to keep all that information. Obviously, if Harts are looking after your payroll, we'll be able to keep all that information for you to meet any investigation or any inquiry from HMRC. Now to recap, on what actually gets paid out. So from 1st of August, the government will pay only 80% of the salary. The employer pays the employer's national insurance and pension. Now, a number of you will be able to claim the employment allowance, which is an allowance of £4,000 per annum, relating to the first 4,000 of employers' national insurance in the year. That has to be used up first. You can't delay claiming your employer's employment allowance. You have to use the £4,000 first, so you probably wouldn't pay much employer's NIC anyway. And then from 1st of September, the government will pay 70%, capped at 218,750, and the employer pays 10% plus the employer's NIC and pension. The 70% at 218,750 is equivalent to the 80% at 2,500. And then from 1st of October, the government pays 60%, capped at 1875. The same calculation applies as where they've got that figure from. And the employer pays 20% plus the employer's NIC and pension. And at the end of October, the scheme ceases. Bear in mind that the employee always gets the 80% of their salary. So as an employee, you will always get 80%. It's just a question of who's going to pay it. And bear in mind, for flexible furlough, that cap is pro rata, so you don't get that full cap. That relates to a full-time salary. So if you're only working part-time, then that is pro rata downwards for the amount of time that you're actually working. Moving on, the self-employed scheme. This is extended for a further 3 months. Which is a bit, it goes against what's actually in the coronavirus job retention scheme, because that means the self-employed scheme has been going for 6 months, whereas it's 8 months for the job retention scheme. So we can see where the government's priorities lie. If you're eligible for the second and final grant and your business has been adversely affected on or after the 14th of July 20, you'll be able to make a claim in August 20. And we will go back and we'll in the next slide or so, we'll have a look at what adversely affected actually means. You must claim by the 13th of July for the first grant. So we don't have that much time left. We've got about 3 weeks left to make this claim. If you haven't made the claim, then we need to get it done fairly sharpish. You can claim 80% of the average monthly profits, capped at 7,500 in total. The claim is reduced to 70% for the second grant, and that's capped at 6,570, which is again is approximately equivalent to the 80% of the equal 7,500. You can claim the second grant if you've not claimed the first. So maybe you weren't adversely affected for the first few months, but then you were for the second 3 months. So therefore you can claim. And as agents, we cannot make your claim for you. Again, we've been advised by HMRC we can't do this. If there are multiple claims from us, it triggers a fraud inquiry because the HMRC trace the IP address that it's coming from. So again, we can't make your claim. We can talk you through how to do it, and we can show you how to do it, but we physically cannot put the claim in for you. If you want any help with that, please let us know. So what does it mean by adversely affected by coronavirus? So if you're unable to work, you're adversely affected if you are shielding, if you're self-isolating, or you're on sick leave because of coronavirus, or have caring responsibilities because of coronavirus, or you've had to scale down or temporarily stop trading because your supply chain has been interrupted, you have fewer or no customers or clients, or your staff are unable to come into work. There are further examples on HMRC's website, but they tend all to relate to construction. My guess is that the most of you will be affected by the condition that you have fewer or no customers or clients, but you're signing that declaration to say that you have been adversely affected by the coronavirus. And as long as you can hand on heart and say that is the case, then you are entitled to this grant, the first grant and the second grant. If you're not entitled to it and you go back and realise, well, actually, the business hasn't been adversely affected, you ought to be thinking of repaying the grant. That's it on the self-employment side. There's not much change there, to be fair. And moving on to HMRC. There is a short consultation in progress and final details are currently awaited. But there is talk of a 30-day amnesty coming in to say that if you have overclaimed or you've incorrectly claimed, you're going to get 30 days from when this goes through in royal assent by the end of July to actually repay any grants that you've actually received. So that applies to both the furlough grant and the self-employed grant. So if you've overclaimed and realised you shouldn't have done this, or you've incorrectly claimed, then you're going to get this 30-day amnesty. A recent survey has found that about 34% of businesses, and this was a survey of 2,000 businesses, about 34% of businesses have actually put employees on furlough and asked them to do some work, which is strictly a no-no. So we can see that this is why this clause is actually going to be coming in, and they are looking at businesses and no doubt will be tipped off by disgruntled employees who have had to work whilst they're supposed to be on furlough. So you just need to be very careful on this. There is a mechanism now to be able to repay claims which you've overclaimed, and if you've underclaimed, you can also put a phone call into HMRC. Penalties, well, the penalties, once the amnesty is over, can be up to 100% for deliberate non-compliance, and that will be by way of a tax charge. So, for instance, if you claimed a furlough grant of £10,000 incorrectly, then you're going to have to repay that £10,000 plus pay up to a further £10,000. That's what they're scaring people with at the moment. Well, the self-employed grant is to go on your 2021 tax return. There's no apportionment for the prior tax year, even though the grant relates to March, April, and May, the first section of it. It all goes on a receipt basis. And from an insolvency point of view, after the 30-day period, we reckon that the HMRC will look to use their powers to recover monies and charge penalties if found to be deliberate. And if in the worst cases, they could start criminal proceedings. This is the sort of stuff which is coming out from the revenue at the moment. How successful they're going to be is uncertain, is open to question, because they're going to need a lot of staff to be able to implement this, and they've got to look at the viabilities of the companies. They've got to look at the guidance which was issued early on, which was a bit unclear and a bit vague. But if it turns out that people have been getting these fines and they decide to put the company into administration or liquidation, then potentially they'll look at the conduct of the directors as well, and then potentially look at reclaiming these monies from the directors personally. So it is something you need to be very aware of. They are beginning to flex the muscles on this. They are looking to get as much back as they can if people have been misclaiming. And bear in mind that survey shows that quite a lot have been. So how Harts can help through this period. We've actually got a 30-minute online session to see if you've looked at all the options, and we'll go through questionnaires with you to see if you've looked at all the claims that you could make, if you've looked at all the deferments that potentially you could make. We're going to identify areas you may not have considered previously. If you want to do this, please feel free to drop me an email. My details are there. Feel free to drop me an email if you want to go through this session. It's 30 minutes. We can go through it and look at all the areas in relation to COVID-19 which you may want to consider, and we'll happily schedule in a session for you. Okay, that brings me to an end of today's session. What I'd like to do through now is just to go through and have a look at some of these answers that we've got. So if you remember right back at the beginning of the webinar, I asked you to put in the chat box about what you've missed most during lockdown. The pub has come up quite a lot. Music gigs, football, well, at least that's back on now, in a manner of speaking. Someone's missing their daughters, grandchild and family, and chats and so on. Friends and family is another one. holidays, that you can go to Spain now if you want to. Travelling, office banter, as people are working from home. I can imagine there are people who are missing that. Having breakfast outside, family and friends, that seems to be the common themes. And playing and coaching sports, closely followed by the pub. That's an interesting one as well. So there you go. Questions. We've got one question in so far, that's all. Is it true that you must have furloughed an employee before 1st of May to claim? No, you must have furloughed an employee before the 10th of June, and they must have been furloughed for 3 weeks, 3 consecutive weeks, to be able to make that claim. If you've not furloughed anybody by the 10th of June, then you're too late to go on to furlough scheme version 2. Next question is, we have a couple of employees who were furloughed during April, May and part of June, but we brought back into work for a few days in June, then went back onto furlough. Can we claim in July for the latter part of June as a separate claim, having already claimed for others in June as part of the July claim, assuming that the employees will be furloughed for 3 weeks or more from restarting furlough during June and at the end of July? As we understand it, we can claim for the period up to the end of June by the 31st of July. So anyone who's been on for 3 weeks up to the end of June, the claim can be made in the 31st of July. And they must have done the 3 weeks. If you brought them back after the 10th of June, they must do 3 weeks, and they've previously been furloughed for 3 weeks for the grant. They can do the 3 weeks straddling the month end of June. If that takes you to the middle of July, then you can make that claim by the end of July, and then they can be flexibly furloughed at the end of that 3-week period that ends in July. That's the only other question I've had. If anybody else wants to unmute themselves, please feel free to do so, and I'll try and answer your question, and if not, then I will email you back. We'll just leave it a minute or so if anybody wants to ask a question. My email address is there if you want that session in relation to claiming all you can claim under furlough, and also looking at what other options are in deferring payments, deferring rent, etc. Please feel free to drop me an email and we can run through the session with you online. It's a one-on-one session. Okay, I believe nobody else has got any questions. So thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. And if you do feel you want to ask anything else, please feel free to give us a call or to drop me an email. And thank you very much for joining us this morning for the updates on the webinar, and have a great week. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Thanks.
Cheers.